wanted to show you sex as regarded in the history of Christianity real quick to show you Paul's influence throughout history. This is on a page called the Ezra Institute. I know that I don't agree with everything that this group probably teaches, neither would you, but it has a very good write-up of what went on in history after the early church that I wanted to show you really quick. His name's Joe Boot. This was written in April of 2013. He says, in the patristic era, for example, the impact of dualistic philosophies exerted varying degrees of influence on the church fathers. The general tone one detects toward marriage and sex was largely one of concession to human weakness for those unable to embrace celibacy or celibate marriage. So these people pushed that if you wanted sex, it was a weakness in you. It was basically sin in you. They might not call it sin, but it's not the best possible state to be in. And they even did that for married people. Origen, who was alive from 185 to 254, went well beyond Scripture and thought the serpent had seduced Eve sexually, and so concluded that sexual activity must be inherently wrong, since it was then the basis of actual sins. I don't understand how he could have thought that sex was only something that happened at the fall, when God had told both the animal kingdom as well as human beings in the first chapter of Genesis prior to the fall to be fruitful and multiply. Was there some other way to multiply prior to the fall? It makes no sense. And that's how you know these so-called early church quote unquote fathers were of Satan. They were not of the Father, and they were not of his word. Augustine himself thought that though marriage is good and ordained of God for the propagation of the human family, if couples could refrain from sex whilst married, that was a better state. Look at the torture chamber these people put believers into, that you could literally be sitting in your den with your wife, and you could both want and desire it, and then think it's somehow spiritually decrepit for you to do so, and better for you to not enjoy one of the main fruits of being married. So he's telling people that have disciplined themselves to wait until marriage to be able to do this thing, that it's better not to do it. Do you see how Paul's teachings crept into the early church? If Paul had not written what's written in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I don't understand how anyone could have even thought these things without Paul. He is the root of all demonic doctrines in the church right from the beginning. This notion of spiritual marriages gradually died out during the fourth century. So people would be married and just married spiritually and don't have sex with each other. But it laid the intellectual framework for the later development of the Roman Catholic teaching requiring celibacy as compulsory for clergy. So Paul started this demotion of sex as being less than, and then you're a better, more spiritual, holy person if you don't have sex, and suddenly the Catholic Church venerates and uplifts the people that they use venerations and titles for, like calling them father and reverend and all these things when Jesus said, call no man father in the religious sense. And they begin giving themselves titles because they're uplifted, because they're supposedly celibate, when probably the lion's share of the time they're doing other things to satisfy themselves, but just in secret. So what were the attitudes going forward into medieval times? He writes, it is hard to see much improvement in medieval thought. Attempting to restrain quote unquote lust, the Roman Catholic Church steadily developed numerous prescriptions that led to restrictions on marital sex on no less than 5 days in 7. Thursday through Monday. So they're like telling you don't have sex on certain days of the week. Abstinence was required in memory of departed saints, the Virgin Mary of the events of the Holy Week. No doubt the devout really looked forward to Tuesdays. Regardless of these foolish prescriptions, the time was notably promiscuous. The so-called Pope Boniface, who died in 625, bemoaned the English attitude towards sex, saying they utterly refused to have legitimate wives and continue to live in lechery and adultery. Well, this is what happens when you restrain the legal aspect of sexual relations within marriage. You restrain that back. These people are they're gonna lose it. Even Paul wrote to that, saying not to defraud each other in the marriage bed because this would happen. But Paul is so duplicitous, and he's got multiple personality disorder, essentially. He says so many different things that they focused on the aspect of it's better to be single, which implies it's better not to have sex. And they uplift that, and they even put constraints on people that are married. Do y'all see how ridiculous this is? The reformers emphasized marriage as the highest Christian ideal. So here's a switch during the Reformation period. combined with their forceful rejection of clerical celibacy, I guess this was during the days of Martin Luther, raised the status of sexual intimacy in marriage significantly. John Calvin in particular taught that the primary purpose of marriage and sex is not merely propagation of the human family, but intimacy. You go, John Calvin. Now, he obviously started Calvinism, which is completely satanic too, but this part he's got right, in my view. He affirmed that marriage and intercourse is undefiled, honorable, and holy since it's a pure institution of God. He's quoting from the book of Hebrews when he calls it undefiled, the marriage bed. And that, quote, God declares himself the guardian and avenger of conjugal fidelity. Of course, he said, be fruitful and multiply. He considered lifelong celibacy rashness that tempts God unless it is a gift of grace, 100%, and considered mandatory celibacy tyrannous and diabolical. 100% agree with him on that.